So hi and welcome everybody. Welcome back to the course of wireless security. In today's lecture, we will be talking and discussing three main concepts that are used to ensure physical layer security. So the first concept is channel-based secret key generation, generating random bits that can be used as a secret key from the wireless random channel between the legitimate transmitter and receiver. Then we will talk about signal injection, artificial signal injection based physical layer security techniques where you increase and improve the physical layer security of your system by utilizing some artificial signals. And these signals can be noise, can be interference, can be alignment signals, whatever. At the end of the day, the goal is to improve security while you are adding an additional signal by exploiting some degree of freedom that exists in your systems. And finally, we will talk and explain some of the adaptation and optimization techniques that are used in order to improve the physical layer security of wireless networks. So starting with channel-based secret key generation, if you look at the right-hand side of the figure here, you can see that we have three nodes. Two nodes are legitimate. We have Alice and Bob, and we have Eve. So the first thing, Alice and Bob try to know the channel, the wireless random channel between each other. So they exploit a feature called channel reciprocity in TDD system, which we talked about in the previous lecture. And they estimate the channel between them. Each one estimates his own channel from his side. And from the estimated channel, you can see that Bob has a channel response. He estimated it using channel sounding techniques or channel topping. It's basically channel estimation techniques. You send pilots, and the receiver knows these pilots ahead of the time, and then equalizes the pilots, and then he gets the response of the channel, and then utilize this channel to extract some randomness that can be used as a secret key to encrypt the data between the transmitter and receiver. So at the same time, since Eve is located at a different location from Bob or Alice, he's not exactly located in the exact same location of Bob. We have another property called spatial decorrelation, which means that the channel measurements at Eve's position is going to be different, and therefore Eve and Bob will experience different channels. And if these are different, then when they extract randomness based on a certain quantization rule, they will end up getting different key bits. And if Eve tries to hack or get access to the data being communicated and encrypted by the extracted key between Alice and Bob, he will not be able to get any meaningful data because his key, which is extracted from his channel, will be different. And he cannot know Bob's channel because we assume that it's a TDD system. There are no feedbacks, no explicit feedback about the channel between Bob and Alice. They just use pilot signals. All what Eve can do is to just listen to these pilots, and we assume Eve knows these pilots. So when he receives these pilots, he just estimates the channel from his perspective. So what's the good thing about this technique? The nice thing about this approach is the fact that you don't need to be closer to the base station or to have an advantage over Eve in terms of signal to noise ratio to be able to provide or ensure secrecy or ensure physical layer security. The most critical thing is to just estimate the channel, make sure it's the same at both sides, and extract randomness. Whether you are close to the base station or far from the base station, it doesn't matter. It will work. So this technique solves one of the critical problems with Wiener tap channel, which assumes that Eve has to have a degraded channel of Bob's channel. In this technique, this is not a requirement. Bob can be very far from the base station, and Eve can be very close to the base station, and still you can maintain and ensure secrecy. The problem, on the other hand, there are some drawbacks and problems. One of the problems is the fact that if the channel is not random enough, then you cannot extract enough number of random bits. And so basically your secret key generation is limited by the randomness inside your channel. If your channel is random enough, you can extract enough number of bits that can be used to secure your communication. However, if the channel is static, which is the case for indoor scenarios where you have a static access point and a static PC, and you are both access point and PC are in fixed positions, they don't change much. And since the environment inside your home is not mobile, there is no wind, there is no cars moving, there is nothing that can cause significant changes to your signal. In this case, the channel will be like always the same. You will not have like too much randomness compared to a channel that's outside of your home, compared to cellular wireless networks, 4G, 5G. The other problem, this is the first problem, that it's sensitive to static channels. It doesn't perform well when you have channels which are not changing rapidly and you don't have rich scattering environment. On the other hand, if you keep using the same key again and again and again, because the channel is fixed for let's say 10 milliseconds, and it's not changing frequently, then you end up using the same key with several packets. And we all know that reusing the same key with different types of data degrades your security performance, and it's not recommended to be considered or used in designing robust physical layer security approaches. The ideal case is to use just one key, one new key with each new packet. Once you have a new packet that you want to transmit, you need to generate a new key sequence that's different from the previous one, so that any hacker, any external hacker who's trying to observe the transmission between the legitimate receivers, he cannot find any patterns, because once a hacker finds patterns in the communication, he will start doing pattern analysis and these frequency analysis. And frequency analysis is really a critical threat on security for many of the physical layer security approaches, and we should try to avoid using the same key with different packets. So that's the other disadvantage of this technique. And other than this, it works fine. It's very practical. You can design this, you can implement it in the lab. You can generate keys in kilobit per second. You cannot, of course, the randomness in the channel is limited, so you cannot generate like huge number of bits. Because the channel usually is not so random. It doesn't provide you with enough number of random bits that you can really use it for securing your system in a very robust and strong manner. So this is the basic idea of key generation. Of course, you can, once you estimate the channel, you can use the received signal strength, the signal to noise ratio, or the amplitude of the channel, or phase, to extract random bits. So basically, each technique has its own pros and cons, but if you use RSSI, received signal strength, your technique will be robust to any mismatch between the transmitter and receiver. The same technique can also be used for authentication. Once you extract random bits from the channel responses at both Bob and Alice, then you can use this for authentication, because at the end of the day, this random sequence reflects and represents the location of the device, and this can be used as a fingerprint to identify legitimate transmitter from illegitimate, and vice versa, as you can see in the left-hand side of the figure. So this is the basic concept, but how we do this? The main approach of doing. So the main steps are summarized in this slide. We usually start with channel probing, then the next step is extracting randomness from the channel. Then the third step is quantizing the random channel, then information reconciliation, then privacy amplification. So what do we mean by channel probing? Going back to the first step, in this case, Alice and Bob collect channel measurements, which means they estimate the channel between them using channel sounding techniques in a TDD system. When I say TDD system, it means that the uplink channel can be estimated from the downlink channel and vice versa. You don't need to send explicit feedback about the channel publicly so that anybody can access it. You can just estimate it from the pilots that the transmitter and receiver send to each other. And if let's say the transmitter sends to the receiver pilots, and the receiver can estimate the channel and transmit his data back to the receiver can transmit his data back to the transmitter. Now the transmitter can use the pilots within the data in the uplink transmission to estimate the channel, which is going to be the same as the downlink in most cases. So Alice and Bob collect channel measurements. If channel reciprocity exists, these measurements are highly correlated, which means that the channel estimated at Bob more or less is the same as the channel estimated at Alice. The only difficulty or problem you might face here, or that might cause mismatch between the estimated channel at the transmitter and the estimated channel at the receiver, is the fact that the RF chain at the transmitter usually is different from the RF chain at the receiver. For example, when you have a mobile device, handset, which is a mobile handset device, whose structure is different than the structure of the base station. Base station is very complex. The RF chain is different from the RF chain of the mobile. And since your signal passes through this phase, so you will get some mismatch due to this RF front difference between the transmitter and receiver. If both have exactly the same RF front end, the difference will be less. But if the difference is significant, then you will end up getting a significant mismatch between the transmitter and receiver estimated channels. The other problem that can cause mismatch between the estimated channels is the interference. For example, when you are a mobile device and you are transmitting your data in the uplink direction to the base station, you get an interference different from the downlink interference, which comes from the base stations and neighboring base stations to your mobile handset device. And this difference in the uplink and downlink interference can cause mismatch to the channel measurements at both sides. So to summarize, it's expected that you will get, after you do the channel sounding, it's expected that you will estimate correlated channels. The channel at Alice and Bob will be more or less the same because you are assuming TDD system and the channel in the uplink is the same as downlink. However, calibration calibration to remove the mismatch between the transmitter and receiver estimated channels is needed in order to avoid the problems that can result from RF front-end mismatch. The RF front-end are not the same for transmitter and receiver, and the interference difference between the uplink and downlink, they are not exactly the same. Now, assume that you estimated the channel at both sides using channel estimation techniques in a TDD system. Now, what's next? You need to extract randomness from these estimated channels. Alice and Bob extract randomness caused by channel fading to generate shared keys by removing the large scale components. So here it means that you utilize the small scale fadings in order to generate random bits, which means that you don't utilize path loss for extracting random bits because there is not much randomness in path loss. You exploit fading, you exploit multipath, you exploit Doppler, you exploit these small scale fading because the randomness is there. The richness of your channel randomness is mainly caused by fading, multipath, and Doppler effect. Not because of path loss, not because of shadowing. It will not affect the randomness of your channel significantly. That's why you focus on extract randomness from the small scale channel measurements, which are represented by fading, multipath, delay spread, Doppler, and those characteristics. Now, next step, you quantize the random channel measurements into bits. For example, let's say you estimated a channel like this. If you can see with me, this is a channel. This is an estimated channel at both sides, Bob and Eve. And as you can see here, we have the channel at Alice colored in blue and the channel at Bob colored in red. So these are the estimated channels at both sides, and as you can see, there is slight difference between them. This difference is due to the reasons I just mentioned, like RF front-end difference and interference difference. So here you have, like, assume you are extracting random bits from the amplitude of your channel. You draw the amplitude and versus subcarriers, and assume you have 30 subcarriers, and you divide the amplitude, you quantize the amplitude into levels, and at each subcarrier you see what's the amplitude of the signal at this level, and based on the amplitude value you map it to certain bit sequence. For example, you start here from 0. Let's say we have 8 different levels. You quantized your amplitude to 8 different levels. So you basically need 3 bits to represent each level. Yes. You start from 0, 0, 0 till 1, 1, 1, 1. So the lowest level is 0, 0, 0. Highest amplitude level is 1, 1, 1. Now, based on the value of the amplitude at each subcarrier, you just map it to bits. At the end of the day, you will end up having a sequence of random bits. This sequence, you can use it as a random, as a secret key that can be utilized for encrypting your data. So this is basically what we mean by quantization. Showing it by example. And here, returning back to the fourth step, now I told you there is some mismatch, and there, if you start quantizing, you will end up having some errors. You will see that some bits are not exactly the same at both sides. Now, if you just use these directly to encrypt your data, you will end up having mismatch in the decoded data. because you are using different keys at some parts of your sequence. So what's the solution? The solution is to reconcile this. Alice and Bob exchange side information to correct errors, and a certain amount of bit information could be revealed to the eavesdropper. So basically, Alice and Bob start communicating with each other publicly over a public channel and saying that, could you please check this part? I have this. Do you have this? By just some checking mechanism. You don't reveal the exact, you don't reveal the bits of the signal, but like you exchange some information that can help remove the parts which are not exactly matching. You remove them so that you don't use them in the encryption process. This process, we call it information reconciliation, and usually sometimes Eve get, due to the messages being exchanged between the Alice and Bob, Eve can get some information about the bits. Now, to improve the security, considering this fact that Eve can get some information about the bits, we have final step called privacy amplification. This process eliminates Eve's partial information about the key and the correlation among the bits. So it means when you eliminate Eve's partial information, you basically makes Eve more ignorant to the data sequence or the secret bits that are generated from the channel measurements. And and the second thing is you reduce the correlation between the bits generated subsequently. Because if you try to generate bits directly from the channel is usually correlated. It's not fully random. If you start just mapping your amplitude values to data bits based on the quantization levels you have, you will end up having, for example, 10 digits of value equal to 0, or 100 digits of value equal to 1. The reason for that is because the channel is correlated, and you will see that your channel over a certain number of subcarriers has the same value. And once you map to the quantized bits, you will find out that all these subcarriers have the same bits. And this is not good in terms of secret key, because one of the main characteristics and features of a good secret key is to be random, which means that the mean of the binary sequence should be close to half. So when you take the mean should be more or less close to half. If it's not half, which means that the number of zeros is more or less equal to the number of ones. If you have more zeros, significantly more zeros than ones, or ones more zeros, this means that you have problem in the correlation, and that your data sequence, your secret key, is not really random. So these are the main 5 steps, and this figure summarizes them. You have channel sounding, channel probing, where Alice and Bob estimates the channel. Then after they estimate the channel, you quantize the channels. Now, you tell me now how they quantize the channel. Alice and Bob agree ahead of the time on a certain rule to quantize the channel measurements and map the amplitudes of the wireless signal into data bits. Now, not only the amplitude, you can use the phase. You can, as you can see here, physical layer key generation can exploit several features in your signal. It can exploit the received signal strength because it's easy to measure it. You can exploit channel impulse response, and this can be amplitude or phase or both, or angle of arrival, or miscellaneous, like different combinations of both, or new things like index of the subcarriers which are corresponding to the best channels, or number of the subcarriers which are corresponding to the lowest channels. any feature that you see is providing randomness, you can exploit it and according to it extract random sequence bits. So after quantization, you have the information reconciliation process. This process is to make sure that the mismatch bits, the bits which are not the same at both sides are removed, cancels, and then privacy amplification to remove the correlation. And then you verify. You just take a sample data and you encrypt it with your key and send it to the receiver. The receiver tries to decrypt it. If he's successful in decrypting it, then your key extracted at POP is exactly the same as the key used at Alice and vice versa. You can start using it for communication. And this is relatively practical. You can implement this, but I told you the other issues related to this. This technique, unfortunately, it cannot provide perfect secrecy because the amount of random bits you can extract from the channel is dependent on the richness and randomness of the wireless medium. And the other thing is sometimes you use the same key sequence with different data packets. You don't update it frequently, and this is a security drawback actually. In security, we don't like repetition. Hackers always exploit repetition to decrypt your data or get access illegally to the content being communicated between the transmitter and receiver. So these are the main points I wanted you to know about. And then here, if we just give an example here, another example to show you exactly what I mean by quantization. You have the channel response in time domain. And by the way, you can do this in time domain, in frequency, or space. For example, in time domain, when you have a single carrier communication system, like in 2G, GSM, in this case, you extract random bits directly from the channel you estimate in time domain. However, if you are using 4G and OFDM, you can extract random bits from the frequency channel response. So your randomness is extracted from the frequency domain. And if you have multiple antennas, you end up having channel response for all these antennas. Let's say you have massive MIMO and you have 100 antennas, then you will have 100 different channel measurements in the space domain. You can exploit these as well to extract randomness. So you can apply this to time, to frequency, to space. This is what I mean by this method can be applied to any domain. And the same procedure, as you can see, quantization, information reconciliation, key verification, and so on and so forth. So the summary is this: it can be applied to all the domains, including time, frequency, space, and even if power domain sometimes if you have other things to do with it. So now we are done with channel-based secret key generation. Let's move to the artificial signal interference, noise, alignment, injection, addition, superposition procedure. So in this technique, you get help from an artificial signal and you design it properly by exploiting some existing degree of freedom in your system in order to improve your secrecy or optimize it or increase it or make it better at the end of the day. So example of this is artificial noise. When I say artificial signal, I mean it's interference or noise or alignment signal, whatever. You inject it alongside the data you transmit to your receiver, and some people call it addition, superposition, multiplication, whatever. It's at the end of the day something you add alongside the data signal you transmit to your receiver. And this something that you add is artificial in the sense that you designed it. It was not there naturally. You designed it for the purpose of creating secrecy, providing security, and this should be designed in a way that it harms Eve, but it doesn't harm Bob. And artificial noise injection or addition in spatial domain is very common technique that's used in the literature to provide secrecy and security. This is in space, yes. In time domain, you can use something. You can use a technique called artificial signal injection exploiting ARQ. So ARQ works in time domain, yes, and if you are using a single carrier, then it becomes in time domain. The basic idea here to add artificial signal with each packet that you transmit to your receiver. Now, since you add kind of randomness to your data packet, the receiver will not be able to decode the packet from the first round. Therefore, he will request another packet to be resent again so that he can improve the signal to noise ratio at his side. Now, while we send the other packet, which is this, I can highlight it for you. This is the second packet. While we send the second packet here, you design the second signal, the alignment signal or the artificial signal, which is called R2, in such a way that it can cancel the first signal when they get combined at the receiver. So what are the main things that you are exploiting and making use of in this technique? First, you are exploiting the ARQ process, the retransmission process. Second, you are exploiting the combination process at the receiver, the MRC. And the third, you are exploiting the channel between the transmitter and receiver. And these techniques work well, and it can provide really perfect secrecy in the sense that you will have no information leakage to Eve whatsoever. Because with each new data you transmit, you generate a new random message, a new random artificial signal, which is represented by G, and then normalized or equalized by the channel H1 in the first round, and then in the second round the channel H2. So why is this better than secret key generation? Because you don't use the same key with several packets. For each new packet you want to transmit, you can generate a new random thing that you can add on top of it. So there is nothing called using the same key with different packets. So the randomness is updated frequently. And the other thing, you don't need to do anything at the receiver side, which is good for Internet of Things devices, because all what the receiver needs to do is just to add the received packets using MRC, maximum ratio combining. And once you add them, you end up having this signal, which is, if you see here, this signal, x multiplied by H1 square plus H2 square. It's basically, this is the pure data signal without any interference coming from R1 or R2. And this is the details of the system from the base station to the receivers and how the process works. But this is one of the good techniques that can provide really good security level. Now, another technique that we can use it as well. So we have up until now we discussed this technique that can be applied in the spatial domain, space. This is time domain, and also it can be in frequency domain. But this is specifically in frequency domain. So how does this technique work? Basically, you assume you have two base stations and you have users in between, and you assume that you use OFDM. So the first base station and the second base station, they both send random signals alongside the data itself that they want to send to the legitimate receiver POP, but Also, they send, along with the data, they send another signal called alignment signal or artificial signal that they cancel each other once they reach the pop. So you add, so your first signal is this, yes? Let's just highlight it here. This is your first signal. And let's say if a hacker is here, let's say Eve is here in the middle, Eve in the middle here, and when Eve listens to the data, he will get X plus R1. R1 is a random signal that causes interference to X1. Since there is significant interference, Eve cannot get the data. Assume Eve is here as well. Also, he cannot get the data because there is another random signal that's being superimposed. Assume Eve is here and receiving data from both base stations. Now, since R1 and R2 are designed to be a function of the legitimate receiver channel, Bob, as you can see, R1 equal A of N equal over HP, and R2 A of N over HP2. In this case, since the signal is designed based on the legitimate receiver channel, when it reaches Eve, those signals, when they get combined, they will not cancel. So the interference will remain there, and he cannot decode the data. While at Bob, the signals will perfectly cancel because these signals, R1 and R2, are exactly designed to cancel any interference that Bob can get from the additionally added artificial signals. You can check the math here. You can check the math, the received signal at Bob and Eve in from the first base station, second base station, and you can see how Eve is getting this signal, which is X, the data, plus this term of interference, which is significant, and this can prevent Eve from decoding the data, while Bob is getting this term, which is really the data plus normal noise over fading, which we always get in normal situations. This shows you the math and the visualization of the system model, but how do you implement this in an OFDM system? So for this, I need you to look at this figure here. So you have the bits coming and you distribute them to two base station 1 and base station 2. You send them to both base stations, and then on top of the modulated signals, after you modulate your signal and get the complex numbers, you generate a signal, a random signal R1, and you add it on top of the signal in the frequency domain before I50. And then you add CB, and then you go to the RF front-end operations, a power amplifier, filters, this and that, until you reach the antenna. The same from the base station 2, you just add another additional signal before I50, and as you can see, I just put the equations here for you to just check and see how the signal will look like. So the transmitted signal, at the end of the day, you will get a signal like this, y equal the Fourier transform matrix multiplied by t, ht, g, f inverse x. F inverse is the inverse. This is what you get in the frequency domain at Bob and Eve. So obviously, since this random signal is based on Bob's channel, they will not cancel at Eve, but they will cancel at Bob, and they will exactly cancel at this point. The rectangular sign here that I put green here means they cancel here, but for Eve, the red one, they will not cancel. This is how you implement it. This idea is patented actually, and this is very practical, and it can provide perfect secrecy. And it's really one of the strongest physical layer security approaches that can prevent Eve from getting access to the data of Bob. So now you have, this is in frequency domain. You know how we can design security techniques in time domain, space domain, in frequency domain. So you have very good understanding now of how this approach can be implemented. We also have other techniques that can exploit CB. For example, here in this technique obviously it adds artificial signal, but how is this different from the previous ones? It adds a signal here on top of your data signal, CB and data, and this signal is designed in such a way that when it passes the channel here between the transmitter and receiver, the added signal gets aligned on top of the CB. Here the signal will be accumulated over the CB, and since it will get accumulated over the CB, and at the receiver side you get rid of the CB, you cancel it, you will end up getting data without any interference, no interference. Now this works for the legitimate receiver Bob, but for Eve, since this channel is function of Bob's channel, the signal here will not align over the CB, it will just be over the whole data, and it will act as an interference to the data with respect to Eve, and therefore Eve will not be able to decode the data. This is also one of the very intelligent techniques that can be used for providing security in time domain. Here, as you can see, I'm adding the signal in time domain after the IFFT process. So this is another nice technique as well. Let's see what other techniques we can see here. We have another technique here in case that the channel is not providing enough randomness. You can design a filter at the receiver here and use this filter and design the alignment signal as function of the channel plus this filter. So this filter becomes part of the channel. Why this is important? This is important for the cases where the channel is not providing enough multipath, because this technique requires rich multipath in your environment. If the environment is not providing enough multipath, you design a filter at the receiver and you consider this filter as part of the channel, and you design your alignment signal based on the combination of both the channel and the filter. And then you have another technique where you can add artificial signals in the over the subcarriers, which are corresponding to deep fades. And so on top of adding alignment signal that exploit the CB, you can add artificial signals in the subcarriers, which are not gonna perform well for carrying and transferring the data. So those are just example of techniques. We have here also another technique that adds alignment signal, not to align over the CB, but to cancel the interference between the consecutive symbol and avoid the requirement or the necessity of using CB. So basically you add signal on top of your OFDM symbols, and these signals, red signal, they will cancel the interference between the consecutive symbols, and therefore you will end up getting interference-free reception at the legitimate receiver, while you will get significant interference at Bob, because these signals are designed based on Bob's channel. So you have also other techniques that can be designed for multi-user scenario, where you basically try to design a secure system that can serve two users simultaneously while preventing your data from being accessed by Eve. So this is also another technique which also utilizes combining the data of two user signals while also precoding them properly, so that the signal can be so that each user can get his own signal. So what's the problem here in this scenario? Why this is different from the previous ones? The previous ones I was showing you only what? Only one link, transmitter and receiver, Alice and Bob, and there is Eve. But here, what if you have multiple users? You have multiple users, user 1 and user 2 and Eve. The goal here is that first you need to make the signal of user 1 protected from illegitimate access of Eve, and also protected of the illegitimate access of user 2. I don't want user 2 to access my data, and I don't want an external eavesdropper to access my data. So the goal here is to protect your data against internal eavesdropper, which is user 2. User 2, we call it internal eavesdropper because it's authentic, it's known to the network, and external eavesdropper, which is Eve. So basically, this is the main difference between this system and the previous system. The previous systems, you have here multi-user scenario and two signals combined with each other. And the goal here not only to protect your signal from Eve, which is the external eavesdropper, but also from the other users in the network. Because this is a problem in MIMO scenarios, MIMO case. And this is the math for the technique that I just mentioned, how to design it, and the precoders, what are their values, and how to properly add them and align them and calculate them, and then end up having the precoder values that can be used in order to make sure that only the legitimate receivers can get their own signals only, without allowing Eve or other user signal getting each other's signals. Now, this is really the stuff I wanted to discuss with you regarding to artificial signal injection, which is one of the main techniques used in physical layer security. Now, the other approach is, the third final approach is adaptation and optimization. Now, in cases, for cases where you don't want to add artificial signal, because you may say that artificial signal can cause interference to other users, it can consume some extra power, and I want to save it. I am in a situation where I cannot afford wasting any more power. Or you are in a situation where you don't want to use secret key generation, you just think you want to use a new kind of techniques that can really provide security while improving the performance of your system and not degrading it too much. So here we have the adaptation approach. So in the adaptation approach, the basic concept is this: you adapt your resources, your transmission parameters, whatever they are. You optimize them and adapt them according to the needs and requirements of the legitimate receiver only. And since they are only optimized to the legitimate receiver without giving any regard to the eavesdroppers, these parameters will work, will make the signal, will make the transmission work perfectly for those users whose channels are exploited in order to optimize the transmission according to them. Where for Eve, things will not be optimized, and therefore there will be a performance difference between the legitimate receiver and the eavesdropper. And this, we give you an example of subcarrier allocation, for example. Let's say we have two users, Bob and Eve, and each one experiencing different channel response due to having different locations. So this is the channel response of Bob, and this is the channel response of Eve. And as you can see, their channels are different. If you look at this region here, you can see that in this region, Eve, the channel response of Eve is better than Bob, which means that the amplitude of the channel is higher. So any signal you send over this subcarrier, or any signal you send in this region, it will not reach Bob properly because the channel is already in deep fade. If you took wireless communication course, you know if the channel is in deep fade, then your data will be lost most of the time. You cannot recover it. But Eve has good channel. So what you do, if the transmitter is gonna lose this data with respect to the legitimate receiver Bob, then why should he send the data? He can just choose to be silent during this duration or over this subcarrier. Not talk, not send anything. So while Eve has good channel, he can receive things with high probability of success. Bob cannot. Then I don't send anything. Then Eve will not. We will prevent Eve from making use or taking advantage of his high channel quality performance. On the other hand, when the channel, see here, when the channel of Bob is good, but the channel of Eve is bad, here we have deep fade for Eve, we can transmit our data. So in this case, Bob's channel is good, so whatever you transmit over this channel, Bob will be able to decode it successfully. While, yes, you are transmitting over this channel, but Eve has a very bad deep faded channel, so he will not be able to decode that data. So on average, if you keep using this for a period of time or over a bunch of large bandwidth, like 20 megahertz, you will end up causing really significant difference between Bob's performance and Eve's performance. If we want to just check this performance, you can look at this figure that shows the bit error rate or error vector magnitude versus the signal to noise ratio, assuming that Bob and Eve are more or less located in the same distance from the base station. They have the same signal to noise ratio, but they don't have the same instantaneous signal to noise ratio, which is affected usually by fading. Due to this mechanism, due to just allocating subcarriers due to transmitting over the subcarriers which are good to Bob but not good to Eve, you will end up getting this performance. You will get this bit error rate for Bob. This is Bob, and this bit error rate for Eve. So which bit error rate is better? Of course, the lower, the better. So this created the secrecy gap. If you remember with me what I talked in the previous lecture about secrecy gap and how to utilize this gap for providing security. So we have gap here. We have gap. This is gap between the performance of two receivers. And this gap can allow us send some secret information between the transmitter and receiver. Now, this is just due to a method called adapting the resources or optimizing them properly according to the channel quality. You can use the same thing for modulation. You can adapt the modulation, you can adapt the power, you can adapt other resources and optimize them according to the channel of Bob. And all these techniques will end up favoring the performance of Bob with respect to Eve. Now, what if I want to improve the performance more? What can I do? I can, instead of just being silent in those phases where I don't send any information, I can choose to send artificial signal. And since Bob knows that Alice is sending artificial signal over the deep faded region, Bob can always cancel them. But Eve cannot cancel them because these signals are injected and added according to Bob's channel, which is different from Eve, and Eve cannot know Bob's channel in a TDD system. So you will end up getting this bit error rate. The new bit error rate after artificial signal injection is this. This is worse than the previous bit error rate. This means that no matter what the signal to noise ratio is in the x-axis here, the signal to noise ratio, let's say 25 dB, you cannot reach good bit error rate. You cannot reach even 10 to minus 1, which means that you cannot decode any service successfully, which is really astonishing. This is also one of the good approaches to provide security. You combine adaptation and with artificial signal injections. So one thing to note here that adaptation alone cannot provide perfect secrecy. That's why we always need some help from artificial signal injections or other techniques. So this is how this method works, and for those who are interested in analyzing the performance and understanding how to maybe code this technique or implement it and understand all the details of it, you can check the paper here that I will send it to you. The paper is basically this one. This one, you can just check it and see how this technique is being implemented and the performance and all the different details of it. I'm gonna share the paper with you as well. So here this is one of the good techniques, and as I told you, you can apply adaptation using adaptive modulation schemes. This is another technique that utilizes adaptive modulation instead of adaptive resource allocation or adaptive subcarrier selection. Here you optimize your modulation according to the signal to noise ratio. So if you use ARQ is also an adaptation technique that can result in providing secrecy gap. For example, the Beckett error rate of a user that uses ARQ is this. This is the Beckett error rate, but since ARQ is optimized and made adaptive according to Bob's channel, but not Eve will get worse bit error rate, and all this will be gap difference between them, which can be utilized for improving and providing security. But what if Eve has signal to noise ratio equal to 40 and he's using voice communication or video, which requires below 10 to minus 2 or below 10 to minus 3? He will be able to get the service with a very good quality. To prevent Eve from getting the service at high SNRs, we can use adaptive modulation. In the adaptive modulation process, we instruct the transmitter to increase the modulation order once the signal to noise ratio is high at Bob. So by implementing adaptive modulation and changing modulation according to the signal to noise ratio of Bob, you make sure that Eve performance is always above 10 to minus 2 by keep switching from one modulation to another. While, for example, if I am interested in voice and I know for voice I need bit error rate to be below 10 to minus 2, Bob will always get the performance needed. We just optimize our transmission to allow Bob only to get the data successfully, but prevent Eve from decoding or detecting the data correctly. So this is the threshold line, and as you can see, Bob is below 10 to minus 2, which means he can receive voice communication. Eve is above 10 to minus 2, which means he cannot receive voice communication. And as you can see, by combining different adaptation or optimization techniques, you can really significantly improve your secrecy gap and secrecy performance. So this is also one of the good techniques that we usually use for providing security. So these are the main important techniques that that are really critical and important to know about in physical air security designs. And here we can stop here. I believe we covered everything related to adaptation and optimization, artificial signal injection, and channel-based secret key generation. And we discussed them in time, in frequency, in space, and gave you several examples, several techniques that can work in all these domains. If you are interested in knowing more details about the ins and outs of these techniques and how they work exactly, I just recommend you to go to the papers that describe these techniques, because there are too much details there, and you can only, there is math, there is drawing, there is visualization, there is interpretation, intuition. It will be really not easy to understand the whole technique and how it functions exactly, and to build research on top of it by just reading a slide or just looking at the performance figure. If you want to develop techniques based on these ones or improve them or implement them in practice, you need to go back and read these papers. Of course, I will give you these papers and the references. There is a folder I will share with you in which you can find all these papers. And this can open like a new direction for security, which this direction is different from encryption and decryption, which always assume the need for secret key and the need for having shared secret key and the need for having third party that can manage the distribution of the keys and the encryption and decryption process. So this is a new direction, new domain, and it's very promising. It's different, and it has the potential to provide perfect, strong, absolutely solid security level, which is not possible by encryption and decryption so far. All the techniques are based on increasing the complexity. And I believe this is enough for for explaining these three different branches, and I hope you study them, learn them, and apply them as well. And if you have any questions, you are welcome to send me via email or MS Team or whatever you see suitable. I will be more than happy to answer your questions, reply your emails, and get in touch with you even after the course finishes. So thank you everyone for being with us, for your patience, for attending this course. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was useful. I hope it opened your mind to new directions. And see you soon.